Hi everyone, welcome to Voices of Western, the Humans of Western podcast.
This is where we delve into everyday stories of students, staff, and faculty on campus.
Be sure to check us out on Instagram at humans_western and our Facebook page, Humans of Western.
My name is Zainab.
And I'm Kevin. Today's episode features Professor Joe Devereaux from the Department of English and Writing Studies.
Her research interests includes the relationship between 19th century visual arts, theater, performance, and poetry. She also teaches drama, including directing the Western Summer Shakespeare program.
We really enjoyed filming this episode, and we hope you enjoy it as well. Alright, so we're here with a very special guest. This is Professor Joe Devereaux. And I actually didn't ever ask if I pronounced that correctly. How do you pronounce the last
Devereux.
name? Devereux, okay.
Yeah.
And I guess just to begin, maybe you can just tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So, as Kevin said, I'm Professor Joe Devereaux. I teach here in the Department of English and Writing Studies at Western. And I've taught here for quite a long time, and I actually went to Western as an undergrad student. I did my BA here in English and Drama from 1980 to 84. And then I also did an MA here, 85 to 86. And then after that, I went to the University of Toronto, did a PhD, and I completed that in 1996. But before I finished, I did start teaching at Western, so moved back to London and started teaching here. And so my undergrad was in drama, so I did lots of courses in drama and so on. It was really fun. And then between my BA and MA, I actually went to England for a year.
Cool.
Yeah, it was really fun, and worked at a theatre, part-time anyway,
right,
at the Oxford Playhouse in Oxford, just backstage work and helping out. It was really a great experience. And then my PhD is actually in Victorian Literature, and that's the field of research that I do. So currently, I have a couple of books out on Victorian writers and Victorian artists as well. And I'm about to have another one come out next year, and then I'm working on another project on Victorian artists. Yeah,
I guess that's
really
something
fun.
we didn't really touch upon.
We didn't touch on it last time, and I realized,
books, right?
Yeah, and so that's a lot of fun, and I enjoy doing that. And then, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. Yes, and I'm also currently, another thing we didn't touch on is I'm the interim director of the Creative Arts and Production program, which is just starting up. It's going to get going officially in the fall of 2022.
Okay.
But courses are currently running. And this is a program that students in the faculties of arts, music, and media studies can enroll in as a second BA. And it involves things like the course that you're in now, that we're doing, the English course 2041, putting on a production, and that's part of the credit, and other creative courses like that, and also studying the whole concept of creativity. So that's something
interesting.
That's,
and that's something you've you're the lead director who's kind of helped put that together.
Yeah, well, I'm the person who's sort of the who students would go to ask for help in choosing courses and things like that. And I'm working with a couple of professors who are currently employed at FIMS, Media Studies, who teach creative courses. Basil Chiasson, who teaches creativity, and Sally Kiwayosh, who is teaching screenwriting for Media Studies, and is going to be teaching some of the creative arts courses as well. So It's a really exciting new program. Yeah,
that's awesome.
I'm very. It's kind of a good time to launch into something where students can study the idea of creativity and going into creative industries as well.
Yeah,
so,
and you've mentioned that your area of study is Victorian literature.
Yes, Vic, yeah.
Would you say that it's important to keep studying these old forms of literature?
Yes, I do think so, because, nothing against modern or contemporary, which is great, of course, but older forms give you a real insight into the past, I think. This is what I always found, like reading a Victorian novel, you feel like it's like watching a film that's set in the past. You feel like now you're in a different world, and I just love that feeling, being transported into the past like that. And you find out how society, specifically I'm looking at British Victorian, but how that society changed over time, which is very interesting. And it's really I don't know how to put it. I do think it teaches you about contemporary issues as well, because for Victorians, for example, many of the concerns that we have today were concerns then too. they approached them in different ways, of course, and there were a lot of things they didn't. I mean, we look back at the past and go, oh, they were so bad and mistaken, and it's true. But a lot of problems that came up, such as, disparity in income in society, and things like pandemics and disease, that was a big issue for them. And the rights of women, for example, that was an issue. So they were kind of trying to deal with those issues back then in their way. And then now we continue to struggle with a lot of the same problems. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see how you can relate to the people from the past that way. This is what I think. And then with Renaissance, for example, even more so, because it's going even further back, and just a fascinating.
And I guess
area.
for viewers, like, what time period would Renaissance like?
Oh yeah, good question. So the Renaissance, generally speaking, we're thinking of the 1500s, the 16th century, and the 1600s or the 17th century. And so the plays that I like to put on for this course tend to be from the time of Shakespeare. So Shakespeare lived from 1564 to 1616. That's when he was alive. And most of his plays are from the end of the century, the 1590s, into the teens, until he died, of course. Right. And then the play that we're doing, The Witch of Edmonton, was first performed in 1621. It's a little bit after Shakespeare's time, not published until 1658. But I really love these plays, and I love plays by Thomas Middleton, especially, is one of my favorites, who's around the same period, because of the way, I don't even know how to put it. It's just so fascinating to have modern people, like students, kind of inhabiting these roles in this world from the past, and sort of brings it to life. It's like comparing when you go to a museum, which is great. I love museums, but you're in a museum and things really are artifacts and they're preserved and they're not alive. But plays are alive and they've got real live people from now. So there's kind of this great chemistry between contemporary students who are, energetic and smart and bright and got lots of talent. And then this voice sort of from the past that comes through. I find it really fascinating. Again, it's nothing against modern. Modern plays are great, postmodern. I just have, my taste kind of goes towards the past. I also love Renaissance plays because most of them are, at least they're part or all in verse. So they use poetry, like the one we're doing now has verse speeches, and then also has a lot of prose.
Verse is the poetry.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay. And I really think it's a great sort of skill to learn to perform verse, for people playing the roles to, you think of something like Hamlet. He has all those long soliloquies and lots of speeches in that play. And I think it's a great experience for someone studying literature to get to say these speeches.
Not just read it and write it, but also...
Right, and not and analyzing it is great, but also getting to kind of bring it to life and then communicate it to an audience and have the audience respond back.
Yeah, I guess that's a very different experience because you can, I guess when you're reading, like, there's some emotions that you get to feel and, like, relate to, but when you're out there, you have to embody, like, that character.
Exactly.
You can, like, really feel better how they were, like, what they were thinking, maybe.
Right, exactly. It's such a great point because I think that one of the most important elements of acting a show, I'm sure you know this already, but is being able to kind of sympathize with the character and put yourself in their shoes, sort of thing. So even if you're playing a terrible villain, somehow need to make a connection or feel sympathy for that character so that you then can convey what they're feeling at the moment when things happen or when they make a decision and after they've made the decision or an event has occurred. And then, you're right, you embody it. Sure, you can, when you read something, you can kind of get it, but you're more outside of the experience than when you're actually in the play. So,
and I guess the one great benefit from that, at least that I've seen, is being like a third party watching, or you're like not the actual person.
Yes.
I guess like that sympathy also then starts to translate into your life. You start to be more understanding of different people and different perspectives.
I think so. I mean, I think a great benefit can be definitely you start to realize that people have different experiences, and then you start to sympathize with their position more. Whereas, it's sometimes hard to kind of see other people's perspective or to sympathize with them, and it's easy to judge them, right, and form opinions and so on. But when you're actually immersed in that experience, it does change it. And I think for studying drama, it's really important. Most people would agree with this. It's very good to perform something, because now you see how the framework and the sort of mechanics of the play work, because you have to put it on. So, for example, where people are coming from on the stage, or where they go, or whether they're up or down, the kind of actions that they perform towards other characters, how they react to them, and even things like the props. I mean, once we did a production of Twelfth Night here, and that was the first time I realized that money exchanges hands so often in that play, because we had to keep getting little money bags and setting them. And studying the play for years and years and teaching it as well, I kind of never thought of that. And I thought, well, that's an interesting issue in the play that you find out from putting it on, where you might not notice that. Even if you're a really attentive reader, it might pass you by. So
it's like the nuances of like their day-to-day lives.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's kind of lost in the reading, because you can read like I guess there's stage directions and things. Yeah. But actually seeing it, some people, that's a much more effective way to take that in.
And students will often say, they read a play from the time of Shakespeare or that period, the Renaissance, and it obviously is very remote. The language is different from now and so on. So they're not really sure what's going on. But then when they see it performed, they go, oh, now I see what's going on in this particular scene, or what that character's doing and what their motivations are. So watching it as well as being in it really does help.
And an interesting thing is also the language changes that you see.
Yes.
Like, that's one thing you learn about the past from it.
Yes, you do. And, I just love, again, I really like doing these shows with students, because, of course, students talk differently from their parents, typically, and from my generation and so on. And so everybody's got their own way of speaking. And then there's the kind of the slang, or the way people spoke in the 17th century, let's say. And it's great to have students saying these lines. Like, I can remember we did The Revenger's Tragedy, which is a Middleton play. And one of the main characters there would say, "That's my hope, my lord." And you just hear it and think, wow, you just don't imagine someone, outside here at Western saying that, but they do in the play. And then it's that's what I mean. It brings the character to life, because a real live, a young person is saying this speech, and it sounds natural when they say it. So, it doesn't, I think the other thing, well, people know this, I think, from seeing really good film adaptations of Shakespeare plays and going to places like Stratford, Ontario, and so on, that it doesn't have to be all, orating. Like, a lot of it, even if it's in verse, it can sound like natural speech, which is pretty exciting when you think about that. I mean, it's not that in Shakespeare's time, or the time of the authors of our play, people went around speaking in poetry all the time, but they did use those words and so on.
Oh, they didn't speak like that?
No, well, they didn't speak in poetry. That would be pretty amazing.
I thought.
I know. I
thought they did.
I once had a professor years ago who taught Milton, really brilliant professor, Professor Balrajan, and we thought as students in his class that he actually was speaking in blank verse, because he had such an elegant, wonderful way of speaking that it sounded like it was, because blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter, right? So it doesn't sound like, say, couplets. Like, it's not obvious that it's poetry, but then you can sense the rhythm. But honestly, he's the only person I've ever met who actually
and he studied like the same kind of like literature, right?
Well, he was a Milton scholar, and
that's the playwright, or
this professor I'm talking about. He was a Milton professor, and he also worked on modern poetry like T.S. Eliot, writers like that. But yes, he was great.
Cool.
Yeah, his daughter is a professor here, Professor Tulula Marajan. She's a very famous romantics author, scholar. So. And
That's
theory
awesome.
And criticism. Yeah, but anyway.
Maybe he, like, all that reading he's done, it's just like transformed the way he speaks.
It could have,
He and just become a poet naturally.
Yeah, maybe. And also, here at Western, in our department, we have another great Milton scholar, and that's John Leonard, Professor John Leonard. And he talks normally like a modern person with an English accent, but he knows so much of Paradise Lost. I swear he knows the whole poem off by heart, and it's massive. It's 12 books of at least 1,000 lines a book.
That's
so
crazy.
It's very big. But he can just start to perform the characters in there. It's amazing. So if you're immersed enough in literature, I think it does start to become part of the way you the way you speak and think and everything. Which is
I see people
great.
that can like quote people really fast like, from plays, which I find is so amazing because like how do you remember that?
Some people have a great memory and they can just reel it off, and even if they've done it years ago, they can still remember the speeches. It's amazing. Yeah.
And I know we kind of spoke about like the Renaissance plays, but I was wondering if maybe for like people who aren't super familiar with the differences and everything you've learned, like what are kind of some things that have changed over time in like the plays from back then to now?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, the one thing about the Renaissance plays, which is a reason I like to do them, another reason, is that they tended not to have much scenery. They didn't have things like electric lights, and they didn't have curtains, and they didn't have proscenium arch stages, so those kind of stage like a frame. They tended to be in, if they were outdoors, like at the Globe Theatre, they had a thrust stage, which sort of goes out into the audience.
So the audience is like sat around the stage?
Exactly. Okay. And if they were indoors, it was sort of similar, but, kind of like where we are in Conrad Hall, just in a big hall, and the actors are sort of in one area, and the audience did tend to be, in front and on the two sides. So there's like a three-sided sort of thing. And so the thing about that is it means you don't have to build a big set, and you don't have to have a lot of elaborate set dressing or anything. And what they did, because they didn't have those, they just had sort of, maybe the odd chair or bench or something. And then the speeches in the plays tell you where they are. So Shakespeare's plays famously have a lot of speeches that tell the audience where what the setting is and what's going on in plays like the opening of Henry V, for example. You're supposed to imagine the fields of France and the Battle of Agincourt, which they can't, it was way before CG or anything like that. They couldn't put on a believable battle on the stage. Right. So they just used words and the audience imagined it. So I really love that about them. And then the same reason the entrances and exits kind of flow together. So from scene to scene, they tend to just go one after the other without big breaks, which I really like.
Did they have intermissions as well?
As far as I know, they did not.
Oh, really?
A Renaissance scholar, so I'm Victorian, as not a Renaissance person, but I'm pretty sure I've heard Renaissance drama people tell me that the plays were not even really divided into acts and scenes initially, but later on they started to do that for various reasons. So they did, they do kind of flow one after the other. So again, if you go somewhere like Stratford and see the plays in the festival theatre, the scenes just go one after the other out onto the big stage.
And how long are they?
How long are the
whole like play?
Oh, the play. That's a good question too. So the plays, if you take Shakespeare's plays, they range from the shorter ones are a couple hours long, and the long ones can be 4 or more. So the long plays, I mean plays like Antony and Cleopatra. If you do the whole Hamlet, because there's different editions of Hamlet, so if you do the longest edition, it's about 4 hours. The longest edition of King Lear is 4 hours. These are really long. They're
and
like
that's
a big
without
opera.
The breaks, as we spoke about.
Without the breaks, yeah.
Wow.
And so the breaks got introduced, I think later. I think when
the actors got tired.
Yeah,
like we need some.
We quit. Yeah,
we need a break.
Exactly. Well, and I think that in the Renaissance, when the plays were initially put on, the audience, moved around a lot. So if they had to, go to use a washroom or something, they would just go and come back. Okay. So it was a bit more like going to the movies now, or going to a sports, maybe like going to a hockey game or something. Mm-hmm. So people would eat and drink in the space. They'd move around. They'd go out. They'd come back in. And it was more casual. So the formality of classical theater really happened in the 19th century, Victorian period.
Yeah.
So it happened then, and then the 20th century. So where people sit quietly and like at classical music concerts, it was very quiet, for example. But not at that time. The audiences were very rowdy and loud, and
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I know.
No, that makes it harder for the actors.
It's pretty hard. And they had no microphones, so they had to shout over them.
Oh wow!
And yes,
I guess I didn't think about that aspect.
And if audiences didn't like things, I think they'd probably throw. You get that thing of throwing tomatoes or something. Like they would show their dislike of the show pretty strongly. So you needed to be brave to be an actor. Yes.
Yeah, I can see why they eventually needed breaks. Like,
yes,
it's a lot to deal with for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm wondering, like, you also spoke about how there wasn't as elaborate of sets. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it had to do with like listening and like drawing the imagery through those words.
Yeah.
So as an audience member, like, how do you compare the two different experiences? What do you like?
That's really different. Yeah. Well, because actually in the Renaissance, they used to say you'd go to hear a play. And they kept using that expression in England, I think for at least a couple hundred years, instead of see a play. But
that's interesting.
Around after the Restoration, which was 1660, when Charles II was restored to the monarchy in England, after they had this period where the Puritans ran the country, there was no monarchy, the interregnum, middle of the 17th century. Anyway, he came back, and then he brought with him ideas about French theater, which was way more elaborate, and they started putting on these really elaborate, big, expensive, lavish spectacles for him, and then also at these theaters in London, England. And so there got to be a change from going to hear, the audience having that experience of listening and absorbing it and figuring it out on their own, to seeing stuff presented to them. And and then now, of course, if you go to a musical, for example, I mean, it's every sense pretty much. Like, you go and it's loud, and there's music, and there's dancing, and there's speaking, and there's big sets and effects. So it's all everything, and which is great. I mean, I love musicals, but they just didn't have the technology at the time, and so it was a different experience. I think audiences went, and they just needed to be ready to kind of follow it as best they could and sympathize with the characters and things like that. And
it seems like a lot of the imagination work was still on like the audience member.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the audience was. They weren't just kind of sitting there going, okay, entertain me, but we're kind of involved in it. I think you can sort of compare it to, a poetry slam or something like that, where people are they're performing their poems, and the audience does react. I mean, anytime I've been at one, audiences react a lot, but supportive. They don't attack them, but very supportively. And so there's more of an interchange between audience and actor. It's much less passive audience and active people up on the stage. Yeah. That's a great point. Maybe that's another reason I like the Renaissance plays, because although audiences now, the culture is to sit quietly and not react, but if they ever do, I think great. I love when people bring little kids to plays, because they'll, get all excited and shout stuff. And I think, good for you. You should.
Past the baby stage, because then they only know crying.
Yes, they only cry. Well, true. I don't know if you don't really want to bring a poor baby to one, but yes.
But I'm assuming when you say a good line, like, you want people to like either laugh or react to it. Otherwise, it's
exactly. You feel like it fell flat.
Like a concert, almost, like having that experience with the artist and the audience.
Right. Yeah. Like if you're playing a concert, and the audience is sitting there, it must be terrible. Well, and I read a book one time about soliloquies in Hamlet, and this one actor said that he found that one audience particularly, he was doing these soliloquies from Hamlet, and some of them have sort of questions in them. Well, like to be or not to be does, right? And there was somebody in the audience who kept answering the questions. And this actor thought, this is great. Like, I never realized how much it feels like a dialogue. And he just, fed off it. He didn't go, oh no, it's ruined. He was really happy. So it's kind of back and forth. And it just gave him, and again, it's like this insight you get with live theater. He got this insight into how the speeches, some of Hamlet's speeches, kind of are asking for a response from someone out there. So it was great. Wow. I mean, the person who responded, I think, well, that's kind of cool.
Good on the actor to kind of play off of that.
Yeah, he kind of went with it. And because, I think people nowadays do tend to think, oh, no, that guy's disrupting. Shh, don't do that. But actually, I think it's really great when audiences react. And, of course, if you do a comedy and nobody laughs, it's really depressing. Yeah. Oh, no, why are they laughing?
That's a good comparison, because even comedians, like, it's very common for them to play off what people are saying.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and they have to deal with hecklers if there are hecklers, and
sometimes it works out really well, because they kind of work into more content through like talking to the hecklers.
Exactly, because I think the thing about a live performance is it's just you have to have some kind of back and forth communication from audience to performer. It's not just performers, doing things and the audience doing nothing. So I just welcome people to. I mean, I'm not of the school of wanting to make people interact with plays. Not that that's bad. I just have found it's hard. Like, if you have actors go out into the audience, sometimes audience members just get uncomfortable. Right. These days we really can't because of social distancing and so on. But before COVID, I don't know. I just found that most people were like, no, it's like getting pulled up on, oh, here's a volunteer and making them come up on stage. I think most people would rather not, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to laugh out loud or cry or cheer or something, because that's, that would feel comfortable, right? But being pulled into the show, I'm not.
Maybe it's a general, maybe it could be like a general cultural shift, like maybe from like the Renaissance to Victorian time, it seems like there was a cultural shift of people wanting to be more like good. So maybe maybe there's been that change again where people are not as comfortable talking out loud. Maybe because they're so used to, like, we're used to talking like through email, texting. Maybe that also has an effect.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think people just, they and lots of people don't go to the theater these days. It's not the way it used. It used to be such a popular. Not everybody went in the past, but it was a very popular form of entertainment. And so oftentimes I think, people come and they've either never been to a play in their life, or they've only been to a few, or the last time was many years ago and they were a little kid and taken on a school trip or something, and so they feel uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar and they don't know. Is there a way you're supposed to act? And it's like when you go to class. I mean, I don't want to slam classical music. I love classical music, but I didn't realize until, I think probably when my daughter was taking violin lessons when she was a kid, I didn't realize that when you go to a classical concert, you don't clap between the movements. You know how they stop in a movement of a symphony, and everybody just coughs and stuff, and they move in their seats. But if you start to clap, everyone's like, "No, you can't clap between movements." So it kind of is a way of showing. It's like you're showing that that's only the second movement of this symphony.
Oh wow!
And so the culture is a little oppressive, and it's not like that popular music. Obviously, everybody makes noise through the whole thing. Yeah. It's great, and sing along or whatever. But it's kind of funny. So
it's like you're at home, kind of listening on your own, but in a public setting, it seems kind of like odd and weird.
Yes,
like, you're all just like quiet.
Oh, I know. You can't. If you start to cough or sneeze, you're like, you have to get out.
Oh no!
You'll be escorted out. You're like, oh no, because you have to be all quiet in between. But I mean, it is great to hear classical music. I love it, but that is something you kind of. It's an audience thing, definitely. Yeah, it's a very good point you're making. Like, the audience has changed over time a lot. The audience, I guess, behavior, or what's the accepted way of acting as an audience member.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to kind of go back to more of a interactive, as they say in other things like poetry readings and lots of concerts where the audience is right involved in it, and I like that a lot. So.
And the last thing we want to touch upon is that what are some things you learned about as like being a director versus like an actor in plays and things?
Oh, thanks. Well, compared to the two, as an actor, when I was a student, and then for some years after, sometimes I'd be in, never professional plays, but obviously, but in student productions or so on. And I would just throw myself into it. I just loved it. I loved small roles especially, and the bigger ones were okay. And so
Why is that? You like smaller roles?
I like the small ones because there's less stress and pressure. Fewer lines to learn. That's one thing. And also, you just feel like you can do your little bit, and then you're done, and you're part of the whole, the cast and crew and theater company, so it's really nice and sociable. Yeah. And then afterwards, you can just feel like, that's great. I could handle that, no problem. Whereas the bigger roles, there's more expectations laid on you that you perform it a certain way, and also more lines to learn, and
and by more, like,
scenes,
it's significantly more sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it's a lot, sure.
Yeah.
And so I just found, I never aspired to be an actor professionally or a star in anything, so I just wanted to be, in it in the show for fun, yeah. And so that's why I like the small ones, but and as an actor, I always felt like you needed to find some focus or moment that would kind of get you to the right emotions. Like, I was not a method actor or anything like that, really, but I would just think about something that would put me in the mindset.
Is that how they do it? Like, get the...
I think some actors do that. Out? Yeah, they use memory. They sort of select memories and use those to get to the emotion. There's so many techniques of acting. But I would do that, and it seemed to kind of help me get immersed and not think about how I was acting the scene, but I was just in that particular moment. So I think having a strong focus on something is very important. Directing, I just found that it's hard to do it in a way. like, I don't find it any easier, even though I've directed a lot of plays for the student plays here for courses and summer Shakespeare's for many years too. But I think you just need to learn how to help the actors use their strengths to perform the scenes the best. And if it's a group, like if they're like in our play right now, the group of the Morris dancers, they already have a great dynamic, so I don't have to do much. But you know, if it's a group, you want them to kind of use as much as possible the strength that they've got as a group and the way they play off each other and how you know, how much energy they bring to the scenes. And then with individuals, it's kind of talking a lot about what's going on with the character and what are the emotions at the moment and how do they how you know, what they feel is the next logical thing to do in terms of movement. Although with blocking plays, I've always tended
and
to
what's blocking?
Blocking is you know, telling the actors where to come in from, where to enter, where to exit, and where to kind of be on the stage, and whether they're standing or sitting and stuff. And one thing I did learn is years ago when I started out directing directing plays for the department, I would really micromanage this and tell them every move, like sit here, get up, put your hand there, you know, lift it back off here, almost like fight choreography, right? Those sort of things. And then I started feeling, well, that's a little oppressive. You know, maybe I should let people explore how they want to move. So I make suggestions, but if they want to change it, that's the best thing to do.
You trust their judgment with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that, you know, sometimes with, I can see it happening in the show now, in rehearsal, and I've seen this in the past. Sometimes people are sort of not quite in the role and not quite they're a little bit removed from it. And then something suddenly clicks and they're just doing it. And you're like, oh, amazing. Sometimes that happens, you know, on opening night. And sometimes it happens as soon as they get costumes on or makeup, because then they suddenly feel different.
Right.
Yep. And then other times it's just sort of partway through rehearsal, you're like, yeah, that's so great. So I've just sort of learned to be less dictatorial. I think that's the thing. Because I think I partly was that in reaction to doing plays as a student where we'd have very nice people directing us, either professors or grad students or other students, and they just kind of not tell us to do anything. They go, okay, you come out here, and we'd stand there and go, direction, please. Tell us what to do. Yep. And we'd be standing there just in a line, saying our lines, and we felt really like sort of unsupported. So that's partly I reacted against that. I was like, I'm going to tell them every single little thing to do.
Yeah.
Which makes sense,
then they'll feel more confident. But then I felt like it's too much. So now I try not to do that. But
I guess when you get into like the scene and stuff, then you want to like do the things on your own because you just like get into it.
Yeah. And especially with scenes with like you with Susan in the scene. Like when you've got people in a scene, they start to react off each other, and you don't want to be this person interfering with it and going, which I think I still do. You know, I have to try not to do that. You have to see how it plays out and see how they work with each other. It's also why I like to break up into groups when we're practicing, because people can go on their own, practice a bit, you know, a scene with 2 or 3 people, and they sort of figure out good ways to do it. Right. And I don't mind if they want to completely change, you know, the blocking or the way they're approaching this. That is fine, you know, because whatever works best for them is better. So
yeah, I think that's a pretty cool adjustment that you've kind of seen in how you handle that, because I feel like this is a general commentary on like leadership in general. You need to be supportive because that's what your role is as a leader, but then there comes a point where you also have to let things like happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing they talk about in theater all the time is trust. You know, so you do we haven't done this in our class, but it's a time constraint, but you know, trust exercises. So I'm sure people remember from high school drama, for instance, you know, like the falling back and people catch you, and you do have to trust the other people. And if you're kind of running things or you're in a leadership role, that's totally exactly right. You have to, you know, you have to make decisions and so on, but you have to trust people at a certain point to make the right decision and do their part, and you don't kind of interfere or try to micromanage it, because it just doesn't work that way. Like, it's not really actually leading them. So yeah, that's a great point. Yep.
Well, this has been a wonderful talk.
Oh, well, thanks. I enjoyed it so much. So nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much for giving us such a nice insight into like plays, and I didn't know a lot of things that you mentioned, so I definitely learned a lot.
Oh, well, thanks.
And honestly, this is motivating me to like do, because I did plays in elementary school, and that's the last time I did it.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like giving me flashbacks. It was really fun to do, so like that's something.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. A lot of people who do this course will say, well, I haven't been in a play since, I was in grade 3 and played a tree or something. And, but that doesn't matter. You can definitely, you don't have to have been doing lots of training and stuff for the plays we do. Everyone just jumps in and brings their own ideas and energy and so on. So, but it is really fun. It's a nice, I don't know, it's so different from a lot of courses.
Exactly.
I mean, it's even different from arts courses, but in particular, it's very different from science. And
that's a good point.
So people they're just doing all this studying and work and everything in their science courses. This is what people say. It's a break because it's a different kind of way of looking at things, and it's it just sort of takes them. Yeah, like a change is a good thing to do, just to kind of get another experience. So. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we have some more drama converts through through this episode.
I hope so. Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah. Well, thanks so much. Yeah.
Zainab, so I guess